I don't know what it is about werewolf stories, but for some reason, they just really appeal to me. And even though I'm only kind of lukewarm about like the overall reading experience and rating of these books, I just keep going through them like hotcakes and looking for more of them. So it's time again for me to review all of the new werewolf books I've found and give a couple pros and cons about whether or not maybe they're the right thing for you this year. First is going to be the 5-pack series by Cate C. This is a series that's still currently being written. There are 3 books so far. I loved the first book, The Rejected Mate, which has a couple, Una and Killian, as our first feature. I really loved Una. I thought she was so plucky and resourceful. She really was great about picking herself back up. She was really crafty and smart. She knew how to get around things. She didn't let anyone or anything stop her or put her down. She had a great found family thing going on with some of the other lone females in the pack. I was less fond of Killian, but he kind of won me over by the end, so I was rooting for them as a romantic couple. There were a couple of big things that I won't go over spoiler wise. Made me think that Una deserved way better than Killian, and all people ever deserve much better than Killian. I know there's a reveal at the end that's supposed to make everything right or make it okay or whatever, but it just doesn't work for me. I still think how Killian treats Una, both before he finds out that they're fated mates and also while trying to court her, just wasn't appropriate. Part of what I like about this 5-pack series is that there is a fated mates component. There's the question about whether this does or doesn't work out, kind of like in Jamie and Eve's Shadow Beast series is kind of asking those same questions. And also the werewolves do nesting and making cozy places and stuff like that before they do their steamy time. And I love lots of pillows and blankets and all of that fun nesting stuff. The Heir Apparent's Rejected Mate, this one is probably my favorite one. I think Rosie and Caddock are probably the best couple. I love Rosie. I love the introduction of this anti-capitalism, return to just being and enjoying and embracing who you are kind of thing that she has going on. This second book also does a great job continuing the idea that there's a main pack and a side pack. They're all technically part of the same pack group, but it's
over here is the alpha, and then over here is our love interest protagonist with the underdogs.
I love the other kinds of family relationships and friendships that Rosie has. I like how they sort of connected some elements from the first book into the second book, but we took a totally different setting with a new pack, a different set of issues within this pack structure versus the Quarry pack. All of that was great, and I thought the resolution for Rosie and Caddock's 2 different ways of living was really good. I found Caddock to be more redeemable of the 2 menfolk we've been introduced to so far. I know he's not a good guy either in a lot of ways, but I feel Caddock is just younger and a kid who's kind of trying to find his footing and transitioning into adulthood, or Killian has been an adult for a hot minute and has just been being a jerk. But I think the second book is a 5 out of 5 stars. If you're only going to read one of them, it would be that one. I was really hoping actually to talk about this book series in my best books of 2022, but unfortunately the last one I read is The Lone Wolf's Rejected Mate. And that one features Mari and Darren. The point is, I didn't like it at all. I ended up giving it 3 stars because the writing was good and it's a lot better than many of these werewolf stories. But the couple didn't appeal to me. Their issue that they had to get over, I didn't much care for. The first 2 stories mention that some of the werewolves have been being disappeared and that there's this larger threat going on, and they're sort of trying to investigate to figure out what's going on and what's wrong. That was an interesting larger mystery, but it's kind of revealed what's going on here in this 3rd book, and it wasn't interesting. I didn't like it. I also didn't think that this romantic couple was the right pair to explore this larger world trouble with. I don't like the pairing of Mari and Darren either. They don't have good chemistry. I don't buy their relationship. I don't buy the obstacles that they have to overcome. Overall, it just was very draggy, and I felt the pacing was all kinds of messed up. There's a time jump in it that goes from the beginning to a 4-year later skip, and that was kind of jarring and didn't work for me either. And I think specifically the reason we had the 4-year time jump is so we could see the initial courting and have a steamy scene up front in the book and then go to where we are now. I could have done without the steamy scene entirely. All of that said, I am really enjoying the 5-pack series as a whole. 2 out of 3 is not bad. And because these are individual romantic stories, I am going to be looking at the next one in the series. And I am most interested to see what goes on with Kennedy's story. Hopefully that'll come out soon. Next is going to be the Chosen by the Alpha series by Skye Wilson. Now, an interesting thing to note about this Skye Wilson, this is a pen name that a group of authors and editors use to tell paranormal romance stories. And that interested me because she was popping up all over the place on my recommended for me page, like with werewolf stories and devil stories and all kinds of stuff. And I was like,
wow, this author is really prolific. And they write like a weird assortment of things.
Like a lot of authors that I read more than one book from, they kind of do the same thing. Skye Wilson's stuff, like just from the summaries, I was like,
this is a lot. It's really different.
Literally different people. And I'm kind of interested to know more about the economics of that and why they decided to do that versus like a small print publishing press. But I don't know, neither here nor there, just an interesting thing to note. I'm really tired of like cliche names for werewolf characters. Our main protagonist name in this book is Luna and her love interest is Remus. I'm so tired. I can't tell you how often the girl's name is Luna and how often her wolf is like either pure white or like black with like a crescent moon on her forehead or something else like ridiculous and stupid. You don't need to do that. Do not make it this blatant and obvious. Do something new and interesting with the werewolves, okay? I read the first 2 of these books and then I ended up DNFing midway through the 3rd. I just think overall that the series is really sloppy. There's a lot of typos and repetition in it. I'm actually kind of surprised to find out that Skye Wilson is a collection of authors and editors because it doesn't look like they used any editing. I'm not 100% sure what plot there is in this book, if I'm going to be honest. It's like Luna was like secretly hanging out with her mate who's gonna be the leader of the pack, and then he rejects her, and then another pack takes over their pack, and that guy like has a relationship with Luna. It's very messy. As far as like rejected mates tropes go, I like it to be pretty clear cut. It's either supposed to be like they reject each other and then they get a second chance mate, and usually that's like a good healing situation, or they reject each other and then apologize and come back together, and that's sort of like fine, I guess. I'm not usually as into that, but there's just like so many details in this one that don't get covered. Like I still don't really understand why Remus came in and attacked this other pack. Keep saying it's because like the alpha here wasn't a good alpha, but like we don't see a lot of that until like 2/3 into the 2nd book, and I can't quite figure out why Luna wasn't treated well by her family. They have reasons for it, but the reasons don't really make sense to me. I don't know. I just felt like the world building, the story, the reasons the characters were acting the way they were just was happening to make a longer story. Next is going to be the Phase Mountain Pack series by CoraLee June. This one had a lot going for it. I really loved the world building. I identified and enjoyed our protagonist right away. She is not a werewolf, but they have like this interesting thing going on in this world where werewolves pair up with humans that have special talents and like protect them and help them achieve like their full potential. And actually her sister was the one with like the awesome, amazing werewolf and had like an amazing violin talent and was going places. She loved her sister and cared for her, and I really bought their relationship and her supportiveness and her like way of handling the fact that the whole family's life revolved around her older sister. And then her older sister tragically murdered by the werewolf who was sworn to protect her. So the way that the family kind of like closes in on themselves afterwards and tries to deal with that trauma, I thought all of that was really interesting and great. And of course, our protagonist gets drawn back into this werewolf world because it turns out she's also a prodigy and gets assigned a werewolf. And they're like sort of trying to solve what the issue was that made her sister's werewolf and is now making other people's like werewolf protector turn against them, like against their will. So all that was a pretty compelling plot. I was really into like the discovery, the research aspect, the drama of trying to reconcile like the fact that you now are being protected by a werewolf who, well, not the same werewolf that killed her sister, like is part of that same group and has that same potential to turn on her at any moment. It's forcing her to consider like different truths that she just took for granted in her life. All of that was really good. And then we get into the second book, and I won't give any spoilers, but it just totally transforms from like this relationship building sort of like seeking thing to like, I don't know, just a lot of the characters seem to do a 180. I ended up DNFing the second book like 20% in, but I would definitely recommend at least the first book as a read. It's a little cliffhangery, but like, I don't know, I thought the journey was good enough that I didn't necessarily need like a solid close. Next is going to be Denying My Crescent Alpha by Roxie Ray. This book was a shit show, and I ended up DNFing it at 85%. It had like a really interesting summary. It had a werewolf who had been jilted by her fated mate and had gone over to the human world and was like now secretly the head of a huge security corporation who was hunting down werewolf hunters. So that was like pretty interesting. I wanted to know more about the werewolf hunters. I wanted to know more about how she like got all the credentials and stuff to be head of security. And I thought I was gonna get a moment where like her old sweetheart like is sad or remorseful or realizes he made a mistake about rejecting her. And it wasn't too far in where I realized the summary on the book does not correlate to what's written in the book. When we get into it, we find out that she is the one who actually broke things off with her high school sweetheart, and he's the one who's the jilted lover, and he's super angsty and crybaby about it, and I just hate him. Her whole pack is like really weird. Like she left and is like secretly a bigwig in the human world, and they're mad at her for leaving the small town and exploring things. Is this because no one ever leaves? Like, is she the first werewolf to have ever left this pack? And everyone feels like entitled to being mad at her about it too, and like expecting her to live in this small town forever. Also, why did she have to pose as a human, and why does she have to keep her security corporation secret from the werewolves? And why was she hunting the people who were hunting werewolves? They said in the summary that it was because her best friend had been attacked by them and like maimed, but in the book's flashbacks, it looks to me her friend was injured in a childhood accident that's completely unrelated to werewolf hunters, which everyone seems to blame on her. And I also don't know why it ever occurred to anyone except maybe our main character to blame herself for it. Because like the two of them were going to get a good view of this event, and they were climbing this rocky area, and they get startled by some people coming through, and they end up jumping off like a ravine, and that's how she gets hurt. And I can see because our protagonist was kind of like egging her on and insisting she wanted this good view while like she personally would feel guilty. I have no idea why anyone else would ever even for a second have blamed her for what had happened. And it does seem like people said some careless crap to her that like she was at fault. That was kind of weird. I was trying to give it a fair shake. I was trying to let it like sort itself out, but like the main conflict was supposed to be like,
what will happen when she reveals herself?
And nothing happens when she reveals herself. There's still 25% of the book left. I can't figure out why there are werewolf hunters in this world, what their goals are. You can't just have werewolves and werewolf hunters and not explain it. Have werewolves historically preyed on people? Is there some kind of like magic something that werewolves give off that the hunters can get from them by killing them? Like, you know, you don't just have people playing the most dangerous game becauses. And then last is going to be Reject Me by Carpenter. This one was a lot of fun. In this case, we have like a pretty independent like female lead character, and the alpha to be and her end up being fated mates, except like the alpha to be has historically bullied her and been cruel to her and her family and her adopted sister. So she's kind of like,
F you, I'm not gonna meet you. I don't care. You should reject me.
And he refuses because he believes in the whole fated mate tropes and wants to work something out. I love this like turnaround where the person who's bullied and who's been belittled and made fun of is the one who's like,
nah, I don't want you. There's nothing you can do to change things.
There was some interesting world building about different kinds of shifters, about how like shifters and vampires and some other supernatural beings had like come through portals into the human world, how no one really had like a lot of control about that situation, and how it's fundamentally changed the landscape of the modern world. I liked all of that kind of backstory stuff. I did find some of the dialogue between our main protagonist and her sister like kind of awkward, and she eventually develops like this relationship with somebody else, and I didn't love all the dynamics there. I also didn't love some of the things going on between her and her fated mate in general. There were things that made me pause and be like,
ooh, this is like not okay.
It's not even okay in a fantasy story. I'm not loving it. But overall, I think the good world building, the interesting intro into this story, and the like fun character kind of like going through kicking butt sort of plot like builds this up to make this a worthwhile read and something that I'd be interested in continuing. And that's going to be like all the werewolf shifter stories I've kind of gone through since my last werewolf update over here. I am always on the hunt for more of these werewolf shifter style stories. If you've got a good one that you know about, leave it for me in those comments down below. And as always, keep reading. Bye.